A war rarely stays confined to its original boundaries. Like a fire catching on dry grass, a conflict can spread, growing in both size and intensity. This phenomenon is known as war expansion. It is the process by which a battle that starts between two groups, or in one specific location, begins to pull in new participants and spill across new borders. What might begin as a localized dispute over territory or ideology can evolve into a much larger, more complicated and far deadlier regional or even global crisis. This dangerous transformation doesn't happen by accident. It is driven by a series of deliberate choices, alliances and reactions that create a domino effect of escalating violence. The mechanics of this expansion can take many forms. Sometimes it involves neighboring countries being drawn into the fight, perhaps because they share an alliance with one of the original combatants or feel their own security is threatened. In other instances, non-state actors, militant groups or proxies supported by other nations, join the fray, opening up new fronts far from the initial battlefield. This geographical widening of the conflict zone means that civilians who once felt safe, living hundreds of miles from the fighting, can suddenly find themselves on the front line. The conflict's scope widens, its rules change, and the path to peace becomes significantly more difficult to find. Expansion is also driven by the decisions of leaders. A head of state might choose to order a strike deep inside another country's territory, to target an enemy leader, or to destroy a perceived threat. This action, while perhaps seen as a necessary defensive measure by one side, is viewed as a major provocation by the other, inviting a powerful and often unpredictable response. These moments of escalation act as critical turning points, transforming a contained war into a broader confrontation. Each retaliatory strike adds another layer of complexity and bitterness, making de-escalation a distant prospect as both sides become more deeply entrenched in a cycle of attack and counterattack. Ultimately, war expansion redraws the map of a conflict, not just geographically but also politically. It changes who is involved, what they are fighting for, and what is at stake. A civil war can become a proxy war between global powers. A border dispute can become a regional, religious, or ethnic struggle. As more players enter the field, the original reasons for the war can become blurred, replaced by a complex web of new grievances and strategic goals. This makes a negotiated settlement incredibly challenging, as any potential peace deal must now satisfy a much wider array of competing interests, many of which did not even exist when the first shots were fired. The war in Ukraine serves as a stark, modern example of conflict expansion. What began in February 2022 as a full-scale invasion by Russia, primarily focused on specific regions, has since evolved into a sprawling, internationalized war. The front lines have not only shifted and intensified within Ukraine but have also pulled in new forms of international involvement. Most recently, reports have emerged of North Korean military personnel fighting alongside Russian forces, a clear sign that the conflict is no longer a bilateral affair. This development demonstrates how alliances can draw distant countries directly onto the battlefield, transforming a European war into a crisis with tangible global military participation and raising the stakes for international security. Similarly, the conflict that erupted between Israel and Hamas on October 7, 2023, has rapidly expanded far beyond the confines of the Gaza Strip. What started as a devastating attack and a subsequent declaration of war has ignited a multi-front regional conflict. Almost immediately, Hezbollah, an Iran-backed group in Lebanon, began launching attacks across Israel's northern border. This opened a second major front that has since seen escalating Israeli airstrikes, targeted assassinations of high-profile leaders like Hassan Nasrallah, and a ground invasion into southern Lebanon. The fighting is no longer just about Gaza, it has become a wider Israeli confrontation with Iran's network of proxies, a reality that has put the entire region on high alert. The expansion did not stop at Lebanon's border. The conflict has rippled outwards, with related attacks occurring in Syria, Iraq, and the West Bank. Most dramatically, it led to direct state-on-state confrontations between Iran and Israel. Iran launched unprecedented direct missile attacks on Israel, and in turn, Israeli leaders have made it clear that their military can reach any target in the Middle East. High-profile assassinations like that of a Hamas leader in Tehran underscore this new reality where the battlefield has no clear boundaries. This demonstrates how a contained conflict can metastasize, turning a local war into a direct, dangerous clash between powerful regional rivals. These examples show how leaders' decisions are pivotal in driving expansion. Russia's repeated large-scale attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, including one that damaged foreign embassies in Kyiv, are strategic choices designed to cripple the nation and demoralize its allies. In the Middle East, Israel's policy of targeted killings and preemptive strikes, while aimed at dismantling enemy leadership, has also served to widen the conflict's scope. Each of these actions is a calculated risk, a move on a geopolitical chessboard that pushes the boundaries of the war outward, making it more difficult to contain and far more perilous for everyone involved. When a war expands, the most immediate and devastating impact is felt by ordinary people. For civilians living in areas that were previously considered safe, the sudden arrival of conflict is a terrifying reality. In southern Lebanon, for instance, communities that were not directly involved in the initial Gaza conflict found themselves under threat as the Israel-Hezbollah front intensified. Israel ordered mass evacuations, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes, often with little notice and no idea when or if they might return. Their lives, businesses, and communities were uprooted not by a war they started, but by one that spread to their doorstep, turning their existence into one of constant fear and displacement. The expansion of fighting brings with it an exponential rise in human suffering. In Ukraine, the intensification of the conflict throughout 2024 led to a 30% increase in civilian casualties compared to the previous year. This means more families mourning loved ones, more children growing up with the trauma of air raid sirens and explosions, and more communities shattered by violence. Similarly, in Gaza, the death toll has climbed to staggering numbers, with over 41,000 people reported killed. The near-total destruction of infrastructure has created a secondary crisis of starvation and disease, a direct consequence of a war that has left no corner of the small territory untouched. Safety becomes an illusion in an expanding war zone. The rules of engagement often blur, and the distinction between combatant and civilian can be tragically lost. Humanitarian aid workers, who risk their lives to bring food, water, and medicine to those in need, are increasingly finding themselves under attack. In 2024, at least 10 aid workers were killed in Ukraine, while many more have lost their lives in Gaza. When the people who are there to help become targets, it signals a complete breakdown of order and humanity, leaving vulnerable populations with nowhere to turn for support and exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. The psychological toll of living in a perpetually expanding conflict is immense. The constant threat of attack, the loss of home and livelihood, and the uncertainty of the future create a pervasive sense of anxiety and despair. Children are particularly vulnerable, with their education disrupted and their sense of normalcy destroyed. In both Ukraine and the Middle East, credible reports from organizations like the United Nations have documented horrific war crimes, including the torture and execution of prisoners of war. This endemic brutality not only violates international law but also poisons societies for generations to come, sowing seeds of hatred that make future peace even harder to achieve. As conflicts threaten to spiral out of control, the international community often scrambles to contain the flames through diplomacy. This involves urgent negotiations, calls for ceasefires, and the tireless work of envoys who shuttle between warring capitals. The goal is to find an off-ramp, a way for leaders to de-escalate without losing face. We see this in the repeated, though largely stalled, attempts to broker a ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas. Mediators from countries like Qatar, Egypt, and the United States have tried to bridge the vast gap between Hamas's demand for a full Israeli withdrawal and Israel's insistence on eliminating Hamas's leadership, showing how difficult it is to find common ground once a conflict has escalated. Parallel to diplomatic efforts is the strategy of deterrence. This is when powerful nations use the threat of military or economic consequences to discourage a warring party from expanding the conflict further. For example, the United States has positioned naval assets in the Middle East, not to join the fighting directly, but to send a clear message to Iran and its proxies to think twice before widening the war. However, deterrence is a delicate and risky game. It can be misinterpreted as a threat, potentially provoking the very escalation it is meant to prevent. The line between preventing a wider war and being dragged into one is incredibly fine. Unfortunately, these efforts often fail, particularly when the core political issues remain unresolved. In Ukraine, despite increasing global calls for peace as the third anniversary of the invasion approaches, the fighting has only intensified. Political stalemates, such as the defunct 2015 Iran nuclear deal, also contribute to rising tensions. Iran's enrichment of uranium to near weapons-grade levels, a response to the US withdrawal from the deal, has created a backdrop of extreme mistrust, complicating any effort to cool down the regional temperature. When diplomacy fails and political solutions seem impossible, the momentum towards wider war can become almost unstoppable. Ultimately, the expansion of any major war matters to everyone, regardless of how far away it may seem. These conflicts disrupt global supply chains, cause energy prices to spike, and create waves of refugees that can destabilize entire regions. A war in Ukraine affects global food security, while a conflict in the Middle East threatens the world's oil supply. The interconnectedness of our modern world means that no nation is truly an island. The failure to contain these fires is not just a regional problem, it is a global one. It serves as a sobering reminder that international stability is fragile, and the pursuit of peace is a shared responsibility that is crucial for the security and prosperity of all.